I am Carl Richardson. I am co-host of the Picture This podcast and co-chair of the Audio Description Project for the American Council of the Blind. And you are listening to the Audio Description Narrators of America Know Your Narrator Series podcast.
Today, we're really happy to go beyond our narrator and speak with Christine Malec from the podcast Talk Description to Me. Thanks for joining us, Christine.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Let's jump right in and ask what you love about audio description.
It levels the playing field. It fills in the gaps of information that we can't get as blind and low vision people watching a visual medium, a primarily visual medium. And frankly, it also takes the burden off our friends and family, because it's been a funny evolution where friends I would used to go to movies with who would just, as a matter of course, they would be telling me what's going on. And then I clearly remember the first few times that we went to movies and there was audio description. I remember my friend going, "Oh, well, as if you don't need me anymore." And so there's also the aspect of that for the people the informal describers, they can just sit with us and enjoy the movie at the same time.
Wow, what a great example with that burden removal. And you also mentioned evolution. Can you address any specific things in audio description from your experience that have evolved for the better?
Yeah. Audio description has broadened from just being something that we could experience in TV and movies. And I'm lucky to live in a big city. I live in Toronto, Canada. And so I get to take more advantage of this than some, because now there are things like described walks or described museum art, things like that, describe parades or public events that have audio description. And so I feel like what's evolving most is the range of what we can have described.
Sounds like a great segue to Talk Description to Me podcast.
Well, as a matter of fact, it is, because JJ is someone who has led several described walking tours within Toronto, and that's one of the ways I got to know him and be a real admirer of his work and the ways that he thinks laterally about description.
So how did that relationship develop into a podcast where you're having current events described?
One of the gigs that I do is a monthly group for blind and low vision adults in Toronto. Well, it started out in Toronto in the pre-COVID times for the CNIB, which is the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. And the group would talk about learning and new ideas and culture in an inclusive way. So a way that was inclusive and welcoming for people with vision loss. And one of the things that I did was I asked JJ if he would talk about the way COVID looked, because as lockdown started and things were moving so fast and we were all sort of just trying to catch our breath and figure things out, the physical landscape of our world was changing too. And I was super curious about the visuals of that, sort of eerie vistas of urban landscapes with no people in them and stuff. So I asked JJ if he would talk about that for the group that I run, and he did that, and it was so compelling, and it just led us both into thinking about the gap. He just filled it by describing the COVID world, or the different types of masks people are using, or the way it looks when people get together in their yard at social distancing for a backyard gathering. And so it led sort of naturally into talking about current events, and there's so much of that going on too. The world is just feeling so much more turbulent than usual, and it seemed to come about pretty easily. And one day he just says, "So what do you think about this?" And I said, "Yeah, let's give it a try."
I just love how that gap is closing specifically for current events, bringing access to our blind and low vision consumers in a way that is bringing more access. I'm curious about some of that burden lifting and that gap closing specifically with current events. What has been the response from the viewers of your audio description podcast?
We've had, I hesitate to say this, but it's true. We've had 100% positive reactions, and a lot of really what sounds like, very strong feelings about how much people appreciate it. And one good example is the episode that we did on the Beirut explosion, which was sort of a last minute spontaneous. We obviously hadn't planned it, but we the day it happened, JJ texted and said, you know about this, like, do you think we should try to cover it? And so the reason I bring that up is that even before the episode was released, I had a few people say, I wondered if you guys would cover that and talk about it. And so far, our episodes had been sort of bigger picture issues, for the most part, not quick responses to one specific thing. And hearing comments from people about how relevant they found it to get timely access to the visuals of something happening today or yesterday, the reaction we got to that was overwhelmingly affirming, like, yeah, that this is what we have been missing.
And regardless of bigger picture or these specific incidents that you're covering, I'm getting a real sense that the audiences deserve this access as much as sighted audiences.
Oh, no question at all. I feel that access is a right, not a privilege, and I think that it's something we all should have, definitely.
A lot of our interviewees have talked about the entertainment side of audio description, either as a consumer or a creative talent or other decision makers. And I'm curious about your opinions on entertainment audio description in the sense of what you're providing with Talk Description to me as a podcast. It's factual, it's nonfiction. Is there any correlation to what you're doing in the podcast that could apply to the entertainment experience?
That's a great question, because what we're doing is that we can cover so much. We'll never run out of material. And so whether it's a horrific event that's happening in the world, or the way, I don't know, some visual phenomenon that's new, or some social media sensation who is primarily visual, who we want to describe for people. So in a sense, what we're doing is journalism to an extent, but it's so broad that entertainment can sort of creep in there too. And it's current events in every sense. And so we covered, this is not necessarily entertainment, except that I get really excited about it. We covered the SpaceX, the Dragon launch. And so that's not breaking journalism, like Beirut or protests, and it's not entertainment either. But I feel like there's so much scope and there's so much to describe that we'll never run out of material, and entertainment will definitely be part of that. And I sort of hope that at least on the lighthearted topics that we cover, that JJ and I are just a little bit entertaining, because we certainly have fun talking with each other, and we get a lot of laughs out of it, even if the audience doesn't. So hopefully a certain amount of our content is entertaining in and of itself.
What I'm hearing is that whether it's entertainment or news journalism, that we're now including blind and low vision audiences in the conversation, in those cultural discussions, without those barriers that you talked about.
Yeah, definitely. And so in the same way that, I was about to use the water cooler metaphor, except that we don't go to a workplace anymore, but I'll use it anyway.
Great.
So at the water cooler at work, a few years ago, we might have been saying audio description is so great because I can talk about that most recent episode of, Game of Thrones or something, and be on the same page as my sighted coworkers, because we had equal access to that. And so another way to think about that hypothetical water cooler conversation is now someone who's blind or low vision could be a part of the conversation about protests, or about the Beirut explosion, or the George Floyd videos, or even lighthearted things like SpaceX and hand gestures and things. It just broadens the way that we are part of the public conversations.
As you're evolving the podcast, can you name any challenge that you faced that you're really proud of how you overcame it?
Ooh, great question. Every episode we do, I learn something. And so there's there's a basic learning curve around editing and topic choice and timing and things like that. And that's a learning curve. And so learning is, its own challenge. Maybe one specific challenge is neutrality. That's something we both feel really strongly about. And it's of course unattainable, but it's also a really important goal to keep in mind. So it's something that both JJ and I work hard on, because of course we're people. We have feelings and opinions. And we're not robots. That's why we're making a podcast, not an AI contribution. So, of course, we approach what we cover and how we talk about it as individuals. And at the same time, we both feel strongly that it's important to recognize that we are individuals with biases and with our own personal experiences. And that striving for that goal, that elusive goal, is something that we both think about all the time. And so it's in no way, it's not an insurmountable challenge, and it's not something that I dislike. In fact, I think it's a good exercise, but it's something that's ongoing, and that I think we will both always be thinking hard about.
If you were to think about audio description and where it's headed, or even better yet, where you'd love for it to go, can you address some of those specifics?
Oh, I can get really specific. I have this little daydream that involves being in a public park and having an audio describer engage in people watching. And so it involves some technical thinking and some careful planning, because most people don't really want to be audio described, and you can't just huddle in a big group and have someone be talking loud enough about the guy across the street drinking out of a flask and you know what I mean, whatever. You can't have that kind of discussion in as open a way as you could as if you were talking about someone on TV. So it's going to take some planning and strategy, but JJ's on board for this. Actually, we both think it's a great plan. We just haven't done it yet. So, I mean, I like to think about the parts of daily life that we take for granted that we will not know about. And people watching is one of them. And so it's possible, take a good audio describer with a good sense of fun and some innovative practices and some bit of technology involved. I'm not sure about that. But yeah, I like to think about those gaps. And so actually a good example is JJ did a walking tour that was the infrastructure tour. So it sounds really boring, but there was a moment where we're standing in front of a very ornate historical building. He said, this building is blah, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the lines painted on the concrete here. And so the purpose was to help blind people understand the infrastructure that they're surrounded by but don't know about, because it's just an obstacle to get around, or we don't see it. Or, you know, he was describing things like art on letterboxes and bike racks, how some of them look different or more creative. And so I guess when you ask about where would I like audio description to go, my mind goes around the edges of what I normally perceive. So when I walk down the street, there's a whole set of infrastructure things that I know zero about because I don't see them. And no, people don't talk about them because they take them for granted because everyone knows they're there. So those are two examples, I think, of where audio description could expand in a fun and innovative way.
How can people reach you, either on social media or otherwise?
Yeah, we have several ways. Our Twitter handle is Talk Description. Our website is talkdescriptiontome.com. Our email address is talkdescriptiontome@gmail.com. And we have a Facebook page, which is unsurprisingly titled Talk Description to Me. We just launched a Patreon page as well. So if there's anyone who feels that they are able or inclined to help us keep producing, they can visit Patreon, patreon.com/talk description to me.
Thanks so much for joining us, Christine.
Thank you. It was very interesting.